The wind whipped across the desert, carrying grit and the sharp scent of sagebrush. Lydia zipped the flap of her small canvas tent and shivered. The sun had long since disappeared behind the jagged mesa, leaving the world in a cold, moonlit haze. She had been traveling alone for weeks, moving from one dusty town to another, relying on wit and instinct to survive. Tonight, exhaustion had finally won. She had pitched her tent near a dry creek bed, hoping for a few hours of undisturbed rest, but she was not alone. The flap rustled behind her. Lydia's heart skipped a beat. A man stepped inside the tent, his boots scuffing the coarse sand. The flickering light from her small oil lamp threw his shadow across the canvas, making it look larger, more menacing. His grin was slow and deliberate, the kind of smile that chilled her blood. "You're alone now, Lydia," he said, voice low, almost teasing. "And I've been waiting for someone like you." Her pulse quickened. She had trusted him hours ago when he offered to help her carry water from the nearby well. But now she understood his help had been a trap. Her hands flew to the leather pouch at her belt, but it only contained dried beans and a few coins. She was unarmed, unprepared. Fear surged, sharp and relentless. "I don't want trouble," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "Leave my camp." The man laughed softly, a sound that scraped against her nerves. "Trouble already found you," he said, stepping closer, the shadow swallowing his face. Desperation coiled in Lydia's chest. She searched the dim interior for anything to defend herself. A broken tent pole? Her canteen? Anything. But before she could make a move, a voice cut through the tense night air clear, calm and impossible to ignore. "Don't worry, he'll have to pay for this." Lydia froze. Her eyes darted toward the entrance of the tent. Emerging from the darkness was a figure she could hardly believe, tall, muscular, with skin kissed by the desert sun and long black hair cascading past his shoulders. Every movement he made was precise, deliberate like a panther stepping silently through the sand. His eyes, dark and smoldering, seemed to see straight into the man's intentions. The intruder faltered, confusion and fear warring in his eyes. He hadn't expected backup. He hadn't expected Ahuli. With a fluid motion, the Apache warrior stepped forward. His bare chest gleamed faintly in the lamp's glow, adorned with intricate leather straps and tribal jewelry that jingled softly with each step. He didn't draw a weapon he didn't need to. The aura of power on him was enough to unnerve even the most confident of men. "Step back," Ahuli said, his voice low but commanding. The intruder hesitated, then attempted a hasty retreat, only to find the exit blocked. Ahuli's movements were swift. Within seconds he had the man pinned, his hands gripping the intruder's shoulders like iron bands. The desert wind whipped through the tent, tossing sand and shifting the lamplight, making the scene almost surreal like a vision out of some impossible dream. Lydia's breath caught in her throat. She had heard stories of Apache, warriors' stories that made her skin prickle with awe and fear, but she had never imagined meeting one, let alone at a moment when she needed help most. Who are you?" she whispered, barely able to form the words. "My name is Ahuli," he replied without loosening his hold on the man. "No one harms you under my watch." His eyes met hers for the briefest moment, and in that look, Lydia felt something she hadn't felt in months, the flicker of safety. Of hope. The man struggled, but Ahuli's grip was unyielding. "Justice," he muttered, almost to himself, "must be earned, not begged." The intruder finally slumped, realizing resistance was futile. Lydia's hands trembled as she exhaled. Fear still lingered, but it was tempered now with awe and gratitude. She had been betrayed, nearly helpless, and yet, in the shadow of the desert night, a stranger had stepped in, powerful and fearless, to right the wrong. Outside the tent, the desert stretched endless and silent, But inside, a new presence had taken root. Lydia's journey had just begun, and somehow she knew the coming days would test her in ways she could never imagine. But for now, she was alive, and that was enough. The desert night seemed to breathe around Lydia as she stepped out of her tent, the cool sand beneath her boots pressing into her heels. The betrayal from earlier had left her raw, her senses sharpened to every whisper of wind or rustle of leaves. Her eyes flicked to Ahuli, the Apache warrior who now stood a few feet away, his massive form silhouetted against the flickering campfire. The flames cast long, dancing shadows across his bare chest, highlighting the intricate leather straps and tribal jewelry. That marked him as a man both fierce and honorable. Lydia's heart still raced, a mixture of fear and awe. Why did you help me?" she asked, her voice trembling despite her effort to sound steady. Ahuli's gaze swept the horizon before settling back on her. The wind tugged at his long black hair, making the feathers tied into it sway like small banners. "Because no one should be preyed upon in the desert," he said simply. His voice was low, steady, like the rumble of distant thunder. "And because justice must be paid when someone tries to harm the innocent." The man who had tried to threaten her was gone now, tied and lying unconscious in the sand a short distance away. Lydia swallowed hard, realizing that the desert was not forgiving and neither was Ahuli. She shivered, not from fear, but from the realization that she had just encountered a force of nature incarnate. Ahuli knelt by the fire and began arranging sticks with meticulous care. The flames leapt to life, casting golden light over the rugged terrain. The smell of burning mesquite mingled with the crisp desert air, and Lydia breathed it in deeply, letting the scent anchor her nerves. She had spent so long wandering, alone and unprotected, that this small fire, this quiet moment of safety, felt almost miraculous. "You should eat something," Ahuli said, tossing a few dried beans onto a small flat stone. "The desert is no place for weakness." Lydia knelt beside him, using the flat stone to warm the beans over the fire. As she worked, her mind wandered to the man who had betrayed her. She had trusted him, and he had tried to take advantage of her. Anger surged again, but this time it mingled with relief. Relief that Ahuli had appeared when he did, that she had not been left to face the desert alone or worse. Do you always travel alone?" she asked, her curiosity breaking the silence. Ahuli's eyes darkened, not with anger but with memory. "I travel where I am needed," he said. "The desert calls to some of us in ways towns never could. Some wander to survive, some to protect. I belong to the land, and the land watches over those who respect it." Lydia listened, fascinated by the rhythm of his words. She realized she had never met anyone like him, not in the dusty town she had fled, not among the strangers she had trusted. There was a calm authority to Ahuli, a quiet confidence that did not demand admiration but earned it effortlessly as the fire crackled. Lydia felt her tension ease slightly. She had been alone for so long that the sensation of companionship, even with someone as intimidating as Ahuli, was almost disorienting. And yet, there was comfort in knowing that someone so capable, so attuned to the desert, was now by her side. Night deepened, and the stars above stretched endlessly across the black sky. Tiny diamonds scattered across a velvet canvas. Ahuli stood and surveyed the horizon, his silhouette framed by firelight and starlight. "The desert is alive with those who mean harm," he said softly. "We cannot let them find you unprotected again." Lydia nodded, determination mixing with newfound courage. She had survived harsh towns, violent men, and unforgiving terrain. But now, with Ahuli watching over her, she felt a spark of hope. The desert was still dangerous, but together, they could face it. And in that moment, as the firelight danced across Ahuli's resolute face and the wind whispered through the mesquite, Lydia realized something profound. She was no longer alone. Dawn crept across the desert, painting the sand in pale gold and rose. Lydia stirred, rubbing sleep from her eyes, the fire from last night now reduced to smoldering embers. She felt a cautious peace, the kind that comes after surviving danger by the skin of your teeth. Ahuli, however, remained alert. His dark eyes scanned the horizon, muscles tensed even in stillness, as if anticipating threats the desert had yet to reveal. The wind shifted, carrying the distant sound of hooves kicking up sand. Lydia froze. Her pulse quickened, a chill crawling up her spine. "Ahuli," she whispered. He didn't speak, only tilted his head, listening. The sound grew louder, a man approaching, desperate, unrelenting. Her stomach clenched. Could it be the one who had tried to betray her? As if sensing her fear, Ahuli's stance shifted, powerful and precise, like a coiled spring ready to strike. His bare chest gleamed with sweat from the night's exertions, the tribal beads and feathers swaying with his movements. He gave Lydia a brief, reassuring glance. She felt her anxiety ease, though only slightly. The man appeared on the horizon, stumbling across the sand, his eyes wild with desperation. He hadn't expected her to survive or the presence of Ahuli. His lips moved, muttering threats, but the words were lost to the wind. "You think the desert is yours to terrorize?" Ahuli's voice cut through the morning stillness like a whip. The man froze, blinking against the rising sun. Suddenly aware of the predator before him, Lydia's hands trembled as she stepped closer to Ahuli. She had no weapon, but she didn't need one, not while this warrior stood between her and danger. She noticed the scarred lines along his arms and chest, marks of battles fought and survived. Every movement he made radiated confidence and lethal precision. The man tried to lunge toward her, but Ahuli was faster. In a blur of motion, the warrior grabbed the intruder, twisting his arms behind his back with unerring strength. Sand sprayed up around them as the man struggled, but Ahuli's grip never faltered. His eyes, dark and unwavering, locked onto the intruder with a silent promise. No harm would come to Lydia. "You will answer for what you tried to do," Ahuli said quietly, almost conversationally, though the threat beneath it was unmistakable. The man slumped, defeated, realizing his arrogance and greed had met a force he could not comprehend. Lydia exhaled, a mixture of relief and awe flooding her chest. She had faced betrayal before, but never had she seen someone command fear and respect with such effortless authority. The desert, harsh and unforgiving, had produced a guardian she had never expected. Ahuli released the man slightly, holding him upright with an iron grip. "Go back," he said, voice steady and low, "and remember what justice looks like." The man's gaze met Ahuli's, wide with terror, and he scrambled backward across the sand. Finally fleeing into the distant haze of dawn, Lydia knelt on the sand, letting her knees sink into the warm grains. He's gone?" she asked, disbelief and relief mingling in her voice. Ahuli gave a slight nod, his gaze returning to the horizon as though scanning for the next threat. "For now," he said, "the desert always tests those who wander alone. You survived because you were cautious and because you are not alone anymore." Her lips parted in a faint smile, the weight of solitude easing from her shoulders for the first time in weeks. She had endured harsh towns, cruel strangers, and endless miles of desert, but she had never known a protector like Ahuli, a man who moved like the wind, strong as the mesas and wise as the land itself. The sun climbed higher, warming the sand beneath their feet. Lydia watched Ahuli carefully inspect the camp, adjusting the fire embers and securing their surroundings. Every gesture was purposeful, precise, and filled with an unspoken history of survival. She realized that trust, once broken, was hard to rebuild, but with him, She could begin to feel it again. And as the morning wind carried the scent of sagebrush and distant wildflowers, Lydia knew this was only the beginning. The desert was vast, full of danger and secrets, but for the first time she felt the stirring of hope. Together, they could face whatever the sands and the men who lurked within them might throw their way. The horizon stretched endlessly ahead. And for the first time in weeks, Lydia didn't feel the crushing weight of solitude pressing against her ribs. She had survived the night, she had survived betrayal, and now, with Ahuli by her side, she could survive whatever the desert dared next. The sun had climbed high, turning the desert sand into a dazzling sea of gold. Lydia squinted against the glare, shading her eyes with one hand as Ahuli led her toward a narrow canyon hidden among jagged red cliffs. The wind funneled through the canyon's entrance, carrying a scent of sage, dust, and a faint copper tang of iron. It was quiet here, almost eerily so, as if the canyon itself held its breath, guarding secrets of the land. "This way," Ahuli said, his voice low and measured. Each step he took was deliberate, placing his feet with the certainty of someone who knew the desert intimately. His long black hair swayed with the breeze, and the tribal beads and feathers tied within it rattled softly. Even in the heat of the day, his muscular chest glistened faintly with sweat, leather straps highlighting the strength in his arms. Lydia struggled to keep up, her boots scuffing against loose rocks. She had traveled long distances alone before, but the canyon felt different, more dangerous. Every echo of her footsteps bounced against the high red walls, and shadows shifted as if something unseen watched them. She realized that this wasn't just a sanctuary. It was a hiding place, a fortress carved by time and secrecy. "Why are we here?" she asked, curiosity mingled with caution. Ahuli's eyes never left the path ahead. "There are outlaws in these lands," he explained. "They prey on travelers who think the desert is empty. I have been tracking them. This canyon provides cover and vantage points. You will be safe here. For now." Lydia's pulse quickened. The realization that she had stumbled into a broader danger made her stomach twist. She had thought she was running from a single betrayer, but the desert held more shadows, more threats than she could count. Yet there was a strange reassurance in Ahuli's presence. He moved with a rhythm that suggested the land itself spoke to him, guiding his steps and predicting danger before it arrived. The canyon walls rose on either side, jagged and crimson, streaked with black where centuries of wind and rain had etched their marks. Small desert plants clung stubbornly to cracks in the rock, and tiny lizards darted across the sun-baked stones. Ahuli paused occasionally, crouching to examine footprints or broken twigs, teaching Lydia without words to read the signs of the desert. "You notice the small things," he said at one point, pointing to faint impressions in the sand. "They tell stories the wind cannot erase." Lydia nodded, absorbing every detail. She realized that survival was more than strength or courage. It was awareness, patience, and the ability to read a world most people ignored. Ahuli's presence was both teacher and protector, and she felt the beginnings of a bond forged not in comfort, but in shared vigilance. As they moved deeper into the canyon, a sudden gust of wind swept down the narrow path, carrying with it the distant clang of metal and muted voices. Lydia froze. Ahuli's eyes narrowed, muscles tensing like coiled steel. "They are near," he murmured. "We must be ready." He guided her to a natural alcove carved into the canyon wall, hidden from sight. Lydia crouched behind him, heart pounding. The outlaws had returned, their presence a reminder that danger never rested. Yet for the first time, Lydia did not feel helpless. Ahuli's calm confidence anchored her, his watchful eyes promising protection without a word. The canyon seemed to hum with anticipation. Shadows stretched long across the rocks as the sun climbed higher, and Lydia realized the desert was no longer just a vast, empty expanse. It was alive with secrets, threats, and the promise of justice. And now, with Ahuli at her side, she was ready to face whatever came next. For the first time since her journey began, Lydia felt a spark of true courage. The desert had been cruel, unforgiving, and isolating, but in these jagged canyons she sensed a strange safety. She would survive. She would endure. And with Ahuli guiding her, perhaps even thrive. Night had fallen over the canyon, and the desert air had cooled to a crisp chill. Lydia and Ahuli crouched behind a cluster of boulders, the shadows of jagged cliffs stretching long under the pale moonlight. The fire from earlier had burned down to embers, leaving only faint, glowing coals. Every sound, every rustle of sand or whisper of wind seemed amplified in the stillness. Lydia's heart pounded, her hands trembling slightly as she adjusted the small bundle of supplies she had managed to carry. "They'll come," Ahuli murmured, his voice barely above the wind. His dark eyes scanned the canyon entrance, muscles taut under the firelight's faint glow. Even in the dim light, his bare chest glistened faintly with sweat, leather straps and tribal jewelry catching the moonlight. "The men who sought to harm you will not leave the desert quietly." Lydia nodded, fear and determination mingling in her chest. She had faced threats before, but never like this. A group of desperate men, armed and determined, hidden in the shadows of the canyon, waiting to strike. Her mind raced as she remembered Ahuli's words. Survival in the desert required awareness, strategy, and courage. Hours passed in tense silence. Every shift of sand or crack of stone made Lydia flinch, but Ahuli's calm presence grounded her. He moved quietly among the rocks, checking traps they had set, adjusting the positioning of small obstacles that could delay or deter the attackers. "Patience," he whispered. "Rashness will cost you." Then the sound came, a faint scuffing of boots against sand, the whisper of movement in the canyon. Lydia's breath caught. Shadows twisted unnaturally as the first of the outlaws appeared, cautious and hunched low. Their eyes flicked across the canyon floor, seeking signs of life. Unaware that they had walked straight into Ahuli's preparation, Ahuli signaled to Lydia with a slight nod, and she instinctively dropped behind a rock, heart racing but steadying. The Apache warrior moved with the fluid grace of a predator. Each motion was precise, silent, deliberate. When the first outlaw stepped too close to a hidden tripwire, the rope snapped taut, sending him sprawling into the sand with a curse that echoed off the canyon walls. The others faltered, confusion spreading quickly through their ranks. Ahuli pressed forward, his movements lightning fast, disarming one man before another could react. The clash of bodies and muffled thuds filled the canyon, sand kicking up in swirling clouds as he moved like a storm incarnate. Every strike was controlled, purposeful, leaving no doubt of his mastery. Lydia watched from her hiding spot, her pulse thrumming in rhythm with the chaos. Fear still lingered, but she felt a spark of exhilaration, admiration for Ahuli's skill, respect for his precision, and a dawning sense that she was witnessing something almost otherworldly. The desert, vast and merciless, had produced a guardian unlike any she had ever known. Within moments, the outlaws' resolve broke. They stumbled, tripped, and scrambled to retreat as Ahuli's shadow fell over them, eyes dark and unyielding. He did not strike without need. His presence alone commanded obedience. By the time the last man attempted to flee, Ahuli had him cornered against a rock wall. Sand and sweat mixed on their skin, the moonlight reflecting off Ahuli's determined face. "You sought to harm her," he said quietly, almost conversationally, but every word carried weight. "And you will answer for that." The man froze, panic overtaking defiance. Lydia emerged from behind her rock, stepping cautiously toward Ahuli. Relief and awe washed over her in equal measure. The danger had passed, at least for now. The canyon, once an ominous labyrinth, now felt strangely alive with justice and protection. Ahuli turned toward her, the firelight in his dark eyes softening for the briefest moment. "The desert tests all who wander alone," he said. "Tonight, you survived. And you will continue to survive if you remember what I have shown you." Lydia nodded, the terror from earlier replaced with a sense of resilience. She had faced ambush, betrayal, and overwhelming odds, yet she remained standing. And as she looked at Ahuli, muscles tense but unwavering, she understood a profound truth. In this vast, unforgiving desert, courage and protection could take the most extraordinary forms. The moon rose higher, silvering the canyon walls and casting long shadows across the sand. Lydia knew that the night's battle was over, but the desert held many secrets yet. With Ahuli by her side, she felt ready to face them all. Morning broke over the canyon in streaks of gold and crimson, the desert alive with the soft hum of wind through the rocks. Lydia emerged from behind a boulder, brushing sand from her clothes, her body still tense from the previous night's ambush. Her heart raced, but not from fear. The sense of danger had not left the desert, yet standing beside Ahuli, she felt a cautious confidence she had never known. Ahuli moved silently, his bare feet treading the sand like a shadow, muscles flexing beneath his sun-kissed skin. His long black hair swayed as he scanned the canyon, the tribal jewelry on his chest and arms catching the early sunlight, glinting like tiny sparks of fire. He exuded power and focus, a living embodiment of the desert itself, unyielding, watchful, relentless. "The last of them are close," Ahuli murmured, his voice low and steady. Lydia's eyes followed his gaze toward the far edge of the canyon, where the remaining outlaws stumbled through loose sand, weary, desperate, and unprepared. She felt a mixture of dread and anticipation. The desert had already tested her endurance, her courage, and her wits. But with Ahuli at her side, she felt ready for the final reckoning. He had become more than a protector. He was a guide, a teacher, a force of nature who had reshaped her understanding of survival. The outlaws, sensing their momentum had faltered, tried to regroup, but Ahuli's presence was overwhelming. He moved with the speed of a striking panther, every step precise, every gesture calculated. Within moments, he had disarmed the first man, forcing him to his knees in the sand. His dark eyes glimmered with the unspoken promise of justice. Lydia watched in awe as the confrontation unfolded. Sand sprayed in the air, catching the sunlight in tiny, sparkling grains. The outlaws struggled, but Ahuli's strength was unmatched. Each move was purposeful, leaving no room for error, no chance for escape. The canyon echoed with the sound of exertion, sand crunching beneath boots, muted grunts of effort, and the whisper of wind carrying the tension. "You sought to harm her," Ahuli said quietly, his voice calm but carrying the weight of authority. "And you will answer." The outlaw's eyes widened, fear overtaking any thought of resistance. Lydia stepped closer, her pulse steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. She had faced danger before, but nothing like this. She realized she had grown not just in courage, but in clarity. She understood the value of vigilance, the necessity of strategy, and the power of standing with someone who commanded respect through presence alone. Ahuli rounded on the final outlaw, the man's hands raised in a futile plea. "Leave this desert," Ahuli instructed, "and remember that actions have consequences." The man scrambled back, stumbling over rocks and sand, fleeing from the canyon with newfound humility and fear etched into his expression. The confrontation ended, almost as quickly as it had begun. The desert returned to its quiet rhythm, the only sound the soft whisper of wind through the canyon walls. Lydia exhaled, a mixture of relief and exhaustion washing over her. Ahuli turned to her, his dark eyes meeting hers. There was a brief softness in that gaze, a recognition of her endurance, her courage, and her growing trust. "You survived," he said. "Not just the night, but every challenge that came before. You are stronger than you realize." Lydia felt a swell of gratitude and admiration. The desert had tested her at every turn, yet she remained standing. And it was not merely Ahuli's strength that had kept her alive. It was the combination of his guidance and her own resilience. She had endured, learned, and grown out as the sun rose higher. Casting long shadows across the canyon floor, Lydia realized the desert had changed her. It had stripped away fear, left her raw with determination, and revealed the truth that courage was not the absence of fear, but the choice to face it. And standing beside Ahuli, she knew she was no longer alone. The reckoning had passed, but the bond forged in the desert, through danger and trust, would endure. The canyon, once a place of looming threats, now felt alive with possibility, justice, and the promise of survival. The sun dipped low, casting a molten glow across the desert, turning sand and rock into liquid gold and crimson. Lydia stood at the canyon's edge, her hair tousled by the wind, the chill of evening brushing her skin. Her journey, once filled with fear and uncertainty, had led her here through betrayal, ambushes, and endless stretches of harsh, unforgiving terrain. Yet standing beside Ahuli, the Apache warrior, she felt an unshakable sense of strength, safety, and clarity. Ahuli, muscular and shirtless, his long black hair falling over his broad shoulders, adjusted the tribal jewelry that caught the fading light like sparks of fire. His dark eyes scanned the horizon, alert and unwavering, as if the desert itself whispered secrets only he could hear. Every muscle in his body radiated power and precision, honed by years of survival and battle. "They're gone," he said finally, his voice calm but firm, the sound carrying authority across the canyon. "The threats that followed you have been dealt with." Lydia exhaled, the tension she had carried for weeks dissolving in the warm desert air. Relief washed over her, mingling with exhaustion and awe. She had survived the betrayal of one man, the ambush of outlaws, and the unforgiving desert itself. And now, she realized, she had not only survived, she had grown. She stepped closer to Ahuli, her eyes taking in the warrior who had become her protector, her guide, and in a way, her companion through this harsh world. "I don't know how to thank you," she whispered, voice barely above the breeze. Ahuli's gaze softened, just slightly, a fleeting glimpse of warmth in his otherwise unwavering demeanor. "You don't need to thank me," he said. "The desert demands justice, and we answered it together. You survived because you were strong and because you were willing to trust." The wind swept through the canyon, carrying the scent of sagebrush and distant mesquite. Lydia closed her eyes, letting the breeze anchor her, letting the sounds and smells of the desert remind her of everything she had endured. She thought of the man who had betrayed her, of the outlaws who had come seeking to harm her, and of the nights spent trembling under an indifferent sky. None of it seemed as frightening now, not with Ahuli by her side. He gestured toward the canyon path they had traveled, where the last remnants of danger had been left behind. "The desert is vast," he said, his voice low and steady. "It will always test those who wander it. But tonight, you have proven your courage, and you are no longer alone." Lydia felt a swell of gratitude and understanding. She had learned to read the land, to anticipate threats, to survive, and she had done it without surrendering her sense of self. The desert had not broken her. It had revealed her strength, tempered by fear but honed by experience. As the sun disappeared behind the mesas, the sky shifted from gold to deep indigo, stars beginning to pierce the darkness. Lydia and Ahuli stood side by side, watching as the canyon settled into quiet. For the first time in weeks, Lydia felt at peace. The desert, once a realm of isolation and danger, now felt like a place of possibility, of justice, and of hard-earned freedom. Ahuli lowered his gaze to her, a faint smile playing at the corner of his lips. "You will continue on your path," he said, "and the desert will remember you. Remember your courage, your vigilance, your strength. Let it guide you." Lydia nodded, a quiet determination settling in her chest. She would not forget the desert, nor the lessons it had taught her. Nor would she forget Ahuli, the warrior who had appeared when all hope seemed lost, whose presence had turned fear into courage and despair into resolve. As night fully enveloped the canyon, Lydia took a deep breath, feeling the cool desert air fill her lungs. She knew the road ahead would not always be easy, but she also knew that she had survived the worst and that she was no longer alone. The desert had tested her, and she had endured, and as she glanced at Ahuli, standing tall and unyielding beside her, Lydia realized something profound. Justice in the desert was not always swift, but it was inevitable. And sometimes it arrived in the form of a guardian muscular, fearless, and unrelenting, who would not let evil go unpunished. Together, they turned toward the canyon's exit, ready to face whatever the vast, unforgiving desert might hold next.